welcome to those of you who have joined us for today's AAST virtual grand rounds on E-DMEP. My name's Adam Fox, and as the chair of the AAST Disaster Committee, I'm really happy to introduce our speakers as soon as I get some housekeeping tasks out of the way and a bit of history. The first thing I would like to say to everyone is I have been asked to remind tonight's participants that the AAST no longer offers CME for live grand rounds, but should CME become available for the archived version of this grand rounds, those who watch today's session will receive an email once the archived version is available on the AAST website to prompt you to log in and then claim your CME. I am going to share my slides with you. Okay. So tonight we are here to speak about E-DMEP, as I already mentioned, and the housekeeping about the CME. And as already mentioned, no automatic CME, but if it comes in the future, you will automatically be invited to claim your CME. So the first question that I really just want to start with as we begin this AAST virtual grand rounds is why? Why are we here tonight? Why are we talking about E-DMEP? And the simple answer is there is a relatively new requirement from the Gray Book for ACS verification that there be a completion of DMEP or E-DMEP that meets the requirements for the folks at the hospital in order to achieve verification. In the past, there have been other aspects of disaster management planning where you have to be involved with an emergency management group in the hospital and participate in tabletop exercises or real-life exercises. But now in section 4.36, you could see here that the disaster management and emergency preparedness course is a type 2 variable for verification. And what they want is that level 1 adult and pediatric trauma centers, the trauma surgeons have to have in the disaster committee have to take the DMEP course or the E-DMEP course. But really, this is a bit more complicated than just the simple answer that the Gray Book tells you so. And I would argue in this particular case that we have a history that of disasters, both man-made and natural, whereby surgeons need to be involved. What we're seeing, though, over the last 2 decades, from 9/11 to the Boston Marathon bombing to the anthrax scare after 9/11 to mass shootings, is a need for surgeons to be prepared. Not just being able to be deployed out, if you so choose, to a place like Haiti after an earthquake, but to have an understanding of what disaster is and how to respond in your hospital so that you could appropriately take care of large numbers of patients, or even if it's not large numbers of patients, but large enough numbers of patients that it overwhelms your system. Understanding all the elements of that are the key to success and the key to the best patient care that we possibly could have. So from the early 2000s, where you see 9/11, there's been an increased desire and recognition of the need for a disaster course. And it turns out, in doing some historical review of all this, the late 90s, the COT had actually disbanded their disaster committee, and it was renewed after 9/11. And what you could see here are some early versions of the actual DMEP course that was done. The first version of the course came out somewhere around 2003, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank Jay Doucette for providing me some of these pictures and some of the information. But the first course, this first version, was in 2003. There was another version. There were actually several versions, including slide decks that continued over the next several years, at which point in 2007, there was a version that you could see in the second slide, and then the format was made into a manual around 2008 as the first edition. The ACS Board of Regents approved the DMEP course in February of 2009, so we're actually in a bit of an anniversary right now. And most recently, the second edition came out in 2018 or so with an update on DMEP. Now, that's all well and good, but these are courses that have been done in person, and those, as we all know, are somewhat challenging to take care of or get to on with our busy schedules. So the concept was to come up with an electronic version. And again, historically, as you look through some of this, you find that in the past, there was actually an electronic version of the DMEP course. In 2012, there were some flash videos that had been created of this. There were simple recordings, but the platforms were not easily obtainable with the modern computer equipment that was being utilized, and it very rapidly fell out of favor if it even got to that point at all. So enter the last few years where the electronic version of DMEP was thought about and created with the people here in this on this panel. We're going to spend the rest of our time talking about E-DMEP and how it could be beneficial for you and your groups in making sure that we prepare appropriately for all disasters. So now let me please introduce both Dr. John Armstrong and Dr. Jeannette Capella. Dr. John Armstrong is a trauma surgeon and professor of surgery and distinguished educator at the University of South Florida, Morsani College of Medicine in Tampa. He's an adjunct professor of surgery at Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences in Maryland. He's an advocacy pillar chair and executive committee of the American College of Surgeons on Trauma. He's a member of the ACS Academy of Master Surgeon Educators and vice speaker of the American Medical Association House of Delegates. He's also a member of the U.S. Defense Health Board and has led local, regional, and statewide trauma systems. But more interesting to me is Dr. Armstrong was one of the first people who, or was one of the originators of the DMEP course. And he has been an author in all the editions so far. So he is going to be our first speaker, and then we're going to hear from Dr. Capella, who is an Associate Medical Director of Trauma Services in Iowa Methodist Medical Center in Des Moines, Iowa. She's the chair of the DMEP committee for the ACS-COT and a member of the Senior Educator Advisory Board of ATLS. She also has deployed on multiple federal disaster response teams. I'd like to, and I could call her a colleague on that because we work on the same team. She's been to the Haiti earthquake, hurricanes, as well as dealing with the COVID pandemic. So without further ado, I am going to introduce Dr. John Armstrong. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. It's a privilege to be part of this panel this afternoon. And I want to acknowledge the wonderful opportunity to work with Jeannette Capella as chair of the E-DMEP Enterprise, and David Zones, who is chair of the disaster committee of our American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma at this time, as well as a number of collaborators. As is said, it takes a village. I'm going to talk about E-DMEP and how it represents innovation for readiness at multiple levels. Actually, what I'm going to do, demonstrating a principle of disaster response, is to adapt and overcome. And reboot. So we move to our third objective, and we're reminded from Louis Pasteur that chance favors the prepared mind. And here we look at events and learn from those events. So what I share with you there with a little audio introduction is the mantra for DMEP in general and E-DMEP in particular, coming from the observation of Louis Pasteur that chance favors the prepared mind. What we're going to do is to take that observation and move through three objectives, looking at E-DMEP in particular. First, at the end of this discussion, you should be able to explain the purpose of the E-DMEP program. Next, you should be able to discuss the content structure and some of the updates in E-DMEP relative to DMEP. And third, describe some of the instructional design enhancements in E-DMEP, which make this particularly exciting. Why E-DMEP? Well, Adam shared that we live in a dangerous world with increasing mass casualty events. And those are from nature, they are from human beings, and we live in areas with increased population density. So when these events strike, there's a greater population at risk. But I think the other part to this is when you look at results from hospital mass casualty response over the past several decades, we are seeing the same lessons. And if we're seeing the same lessons, then we have clearly a gap. In other words, the lessons aren't being learned. So if our object is to address this gap, we proceed through activity creation for education. We start with the needs assessment, which is the gap just outlined. Then we look at what do we really want to have happen based upon this education and training. What are the metrics for the program? What content should go into the delivery through instructional design? And then finally, how do we assess learners and how do we look at the program and make the program better? So this has been the model that E-DMEP has used. Having already addressed the needs assessment with the gap, let's look at what we intend to achieve with this type of educational activity. Well, we'd like ready hospitals and healthcare systems and communities. We'd like to see surgeon and clinician leadership in disaster management and emergency preparedness. And we want to have the content that's accessible in learner terms and that stimulates further learner action so that the educational activity isn't a spot in time, it's a milepost on the road to ongoing growth and readiness. And Adam nicely highlighted that the American College of Surgeons Verification Review Committee has added a standard for DMEP at level 1 trauma centers that a surgeon must have taken DMEP at least once, but importantly has placed further emphasis on surgeon and broader engagement on the Hospital Regional Disaster Committee, as well as in disaster management planning. The metrics that we seek to use for assessing this program, well, we're going to look at how the disaster standards are met and where there are deficiencies, and importantly, where there are successes. We will aggregate learner change and hopefully improvement by looking at the assessment instrument that exists now, which is a multiple choice pre-post-test instrument. And we're also going to look at the uptake of the course. Is there excitement about it? Are people taking the course? And where might there be opportunities to enhance the availability of the course? The core competencies in E-DMEP are listed here. And we have taken very much the learner perspective and emphasized that the E-DMEP course does address how to create a disaster plan for your hospital based on appropriate tools, how to test your disaster plan, how to recognize that a disaster is emerging and being part of the readiness for that and the response. How do you look at what happened with the disaster, or how do you look at what you're doing with drills so that they're not perfunctory? And then finally, how is it that we can be part of facilitating hospital and community recovery from a disaster. So we would see those as the 5 core competencies for disaster management and emergency preparedness. And E-DMEP represents a paradigm shift. For those who have taken DMEP, you can appreciate that from its beginning, which really was the vision of the late Rick Freiberg from Jacksonville, Florida, he emphasized that there's a content basis for readiness that you can actually learn. And he codified the process of learning and action in the 6 Ps. Preparation, where you learn the science; planning, where you engage the science to develop a robust readiness plan inclusive of a variety of stakeholders within the hospital and outside; and then move to how you would apply readiness principles in the pre-hospital area, how you would do it at the hospital through processes. What are some of the patterns of injury to expect in navigating pre-hospital and hospital response? And then what are some of the pitfalls, the lessons that continue to be identified and not necessarily learned? Well, we have appreciated that simplicity can very much help retention of the material, and have shifted to the 3 Rs: ready, respond, and recover. This does follow a paradigm from our federal government, and you can appreciate that ready includes the first 2 Ps, preparation and planning; respond includes the next 2 Ps, namely pre-hospital and processes for hospital response. One would say that the mechanisms of disaster or pathophysiology might be included both in ready and respond, and pitfalls would cover the 3, but would be addressed more in the recover phase through assessment and performance improvement. So there's a nice mapping between the 6 Ps and the 3 Rs. The construct for E-DMEP is the 3 Rs. And we anticipate that as the in-person form of DMEP evolves, that the paradigm will be the 3 Rs. The course is 4 hours online, and it has multiple points of engagement. Up front with a pre-course demographic survey, just to get to know who is taking the course and a little bit about the background in disaster response and emergency preparedness. The pre-test and the post-test are symmetrical, and they're 20-item tests. The overview really looks at the science of disaster management and walks learners through the next steps: the introduction, the ready 1 and 2, looking at some important tools for effective disaster management and emergency preparedness, the HVA or hazard vulnerability analysis, and the emergency operation plan and incident command system. More on that in a moment. A particularly exciting innovation is the respond piece, which has a learner move through an earthquake scenario, step by step, with a chronology and with an opportunity to exercise triage skills. Recovery looks at how it is that normalcy returns to the hospital, how definitive care works for patients, and how psychosocial needs are addressed, as well as how the hospital and the community can look at what happened in response to the disaster and what should be done differently next time. The mechanisms of disaster looks prominently at injury, blast, burn, chemical and radiation, and is designed to fill appendices to a plan. So that's a different approach from what has been used previously, but it makes sense as you consider how to develop your all hazards plan, which is the way to succeed. Common denominator, principles and policies and actions with some specifics in appendices depending upon the mechanism. The course concludes with a overview summary and then the post-test as indicated. Some content updates. I think that the key to E-DMEP is actually its restructuring and flow. There are, however, some new things that have emerged, and E-DMEP emphasizes the importance of regional coordination through the Regional Medical Operations Coordinating Centers concept, or RMOCs. Some may appreciate that the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma is looking at the RMOC as the locus of action locally, regionally, that when connected across the nation becomes a national trauma system. Mass event incidents involve destruction or damage or loss of function to the hospital. Important to understand a bit more about that. And then having greater specifics about the after action review, and in particular, the outcomes that matter and how one can improve relative to those outcomes. Moving into instructional design, you get a sense that there is a very clear structure about what is in various elements of disaster readiness. And here we look at the emergency operations plan. You see on the right the list of the 10 core elements of the emergency operations plan. And in the course of taking E-DMEP, you would click on each of these boxes and get further insights into what matters for effective activation, for example, or as seen on the screen in outcomes, what are the metrics that matter for hospital readiness? We often talk about overall mortality rate. It's actually the critical mortality rate, which is the mortality rate of those with severe injury, ISS greater than 15, that is a better characteristic for outcome at the hospital in a disaster. E-DMEP also uses a variety of animations. And though I'm not showing you an animation on this slide, I'm giving you a sense of how E-DMEP is using visuals to convey concepts such as, what is a mass casualty incident that leads to crisis care where more patients exist relative to resources? What is a contingency event shown in this slide with multiple patients where there can be one-to-one resources, but it's a stretch? And then conventional on a day-to-day basis where we can do the greatest good for the greatest number because we tend to have more resources relative to the number of patients. E-DMEP engages learners in the tools that are essential for an effective plan and response, and that includes the hazard vulnerability analysis. Here you see a learner assessment of the learner's hospital hazard vulnerabilities. And this is across the active shooter, earthquake, hurricane, tornado, nuclear explosion, and industrial explosion. So events, the learner assesses these events based on the probability of them occurring, the impact and level of preparedness, and that generates to the right the relative threat, and that can factor into readiness activities. So again, it's the learner who is doing this based on his or her own assessment of local conditions. The hazard vulnerability analysis isn't just something that's talked about. Looking at the emergency operations plan, again, across the 10 core functions that you see on the right, E-DMEP gives the learner the opportunity to answer some of these questions about what is needed for communication in this example. So how will you notify people inside the hospital? And how do you intend to communicate with staff? And what's your backup mode? And how do you call staff back? And then what E-DMEP does across all 10 of these emergency operation plan functions is to generate a list that the learner can print and can bring back to or into the hospital to elevate engagement and level of readiness. Part of this is the hospital incident command system, or HICS, where the learner thoughtfully moves through, well, who would be the incident commander? Who would be the public information officer? And by who, I'm not talking about a specific individual. I'm talking about a particular role that transitions from regular activities into incident command. it's by engaging in something like incident command that it can become much more real, as opposed to just talking about organizational diagrams. This also factors into what I shared earlier about a summary of responses for the learner's emergency operations plan in the learner's home institution. And here you see an example of that. Making it real, because by making it real, we stand a much better chance of emergency operations plan considerations being implemented. And dealing with this gap of we continue to identify the same lessons over and over and over again. It's time to learn them and to improve. The innovative exercise with response is a simulated earthquake. In the actual event, this screen would be shaking. And what E-DMEP does is to take the learner through the actions required for effective response. What you see on the right of the screen are some of the suggested actions, which would include activating the hospital emergency operations plan and emergency operations center, and checking on the team and patients, calling security, and remembering the personal element about calling your family. We've learned that it's important that those providing care on the front line understand that their family members are safe. When you click on each one of those boxes, you're taken through assorted actions and responses. You also do a triage exercise, which moves through multiple casualty waves. This is a very innovative approach to the complexities of mass casualty triage, the goal being greatest good for the greatest number. What you can see on this screen are 8 casualties, some of whom have been dispositioned, and each of whom has characteristics that you understand by looking at the key on the left. But the bottom line is this: you're looking for characteristics that indicate critical injury, focused on hemorrhage, focused on B breathing or tension pneumothorax, focused on airway. And you move through this exercise with these casualties appearing all at once and determining for whom you can provide an immediate intervention and take a red or immediate casualty to a delayed status, who needs to move as an immediate casualty, largely for stop the bleeding, into the operating room, and you have to actually assign individuals into the operating room as well. You see this evolve and appreciate the complexities in decision-making with uncertainty and with how resources vary as the casualty waves move through. It's a dynamic exercise. It is keyed to a timer here, which keeps it very real. And with repetition, will enhance the skills of an individual in doing mass casualty triage. E-DMEP also has several features to help learners access experiences from those at the front line. It's called Voices of Experience. And here you see Tina Gardner and Paul Ness, who were the trauma surgeons who managed the Norway shooter attacks in 2011. And they talk quite candidly about their state of readiness and what happened in response. We're also privileged to have Deb Cools talk about her experience in Las Vegas with a 10-1 shooter, as well as Ronnie Stewart from San Antonio and his very broad experience over a number of events. And beyond the content that exists within E-DMEP and Voices of Experience, we seek to make resources accessible to learners. And so throughout the course, there are opportunities to click and access primary source material. In this particular slide, you see a discussion of the National Disaster Recovery Framework, and you can click on this cover and access that framework for more information. Importantly as well, you would see in this top right corner a resources button, which when you click it would bring you to Rick Freiberg's seminal article on readiness for mass casualties from 1988. So a great deal of effort has gone into making material accessible in learner terms, making it memorable, making it very tangible to enable movement from the course into the hospital and action across all entities and professionals and leaders within the hospital to enhance readiness. This is the final slide in the summary talk. Again, E-DMEP, 4 hours. It has 8 modules and ultimately has the objectives that you see here. A learner should be able to review the key elements of ready, respond, recover, and apply them across various mechanisms of an all-hazard disaster plan. And importantly, the learner should come out of E-DMEP able to discuss next steps. What am I going to do with what I have just experienced so that I continue my growth as a readiness clinician, and I engage my colleagues across specialties, disciplines, and professions, and hospital leaders, as well as leaders in the community, to understand the importance of ongoing readiness and ways to enhance the same. Well, Aristotle has shared, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. And what E-DMEP seeks to do is to make readiness a habit. It is not the be-all and end-all. It is a very concise presentation of best evidence about how to be ready, to respond, and recover. So in summary, what E-DMEP does is to make some essential tools for disaster management and emergency preparedness come to life. Prominently, the hazard vulnerability analysis, the emergency operations plan, incident command system, and triage. The paradigm, ready, respond, recover, is a useful construct for discussing actions. And E-DMEP works to leverage a very interactive instructional design so that there is truly virtual immersion in readiness. Our collective hope is that you will look at this course as a way to engage broadly in readiness, response, and recovery, and importantly, progress across those three where you are. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion. And Jeannette Capella takes the handoff. Jeannette.
Thank you, John. Let me share my screen here. And there we go. So as we're going through the day here, please, as you think of questions, please enter them in the chat feature. And after I'm finished, we'll be happy to answer your questions. So to follow on from John's talk, over the last couple of years or several years, we've created E-DMEP to make it more accessible. And this was because we knew that the verification committee was going to start requiring DMEP as a, to be a trauma center. And another requirement that I'm going to touch on here is the need for trauma centers to be participating and conducting exercises twice a year. So I realized as I've been going around the country teaching DMEP that developing and conducting exercise is not part of most trauma surgeon skill set. And I felt like as the chair of the DMEP committee that I think we need to provide trauma surgeons and trauma centers the tools to do this in a meaningful way. And so I think, you know, if you're going to require somebody to do something, sorry about that, you should give them the means to do it well. So we started working on a manual that describes how to do a tabletop exercise. And these are some of the people, the steering committee for E-DMEP and some of our partners in the federal government, as well as several other very experienced trauma surgeons, with those who actually help with exercises at their own institutions have all been involved in the development of this. And it covers, first of all, what are all the types of exercises, why we settled on the tabletop in particular to focus on. And we go through the step-by-step process of how to develop and conduct a tabletop exercise. Starting with the objectives, we provide examples, how to identify your stakeholders, how to develop the facilitation questions, and then finally, how to do the after-action reporting and performance improvement process. So there's a fairly detailed description of the different types, discussion-based, the seminar, workshop, tabletop, and gaming exercises. And then probably the more familiar types, operations-based, drills, functional exercises, and full-scale exercise. We settled on the tabletop because I think that is probably a good starting point, a good introduction for trauma surgeons and centers to get started in this if they're not if they're in a place that hasn't done this very much in the past. So the very first step is to engage your local emergency manager. And if you're in a hospital that already has an emergency manager or health system, they could be that person. If you're in a smaller hospital, say in a rural county, you may not have access to that. So, but every county has an emergency manager, so that may be the person to engage. And this person can be the co-course director, if you will, for this tabletop exercise. At a minimum, they should have taken the basic courses that FEMA offers, IS 120 and 130 and HC, and hopefully also have some experience doing exercises. You could start inviting them to your trauma committee meetings, because they're the ones that are going to be coordinating your after-action reporting and your improvement process. And they're going to be conducting the ongoing exercise program. They are, so that's the very first step, that you're engaging your local expert to help you with your exercises. Then you decide on your objectives. And basically you're deciding on an issue or problem specific to your institution that you want to address in your exercise. It could be 2 or 3. That's probably the number you can do in a 4-hour session, which is what we're focused on here. And as you can see, there's an example, and you basically want to use the same methods that you do when you're developing learning objectives, the SMART guideline. You want them to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And then once you have this objective or objectives decided on, then you can get your stakeholders. This will depend on what you've decided. This should be as inclusive as possible. If one of your stakeholders needs to be a trauma surgeon, then this should be a different person than the one being the facilitator or the co-facilitator. And make sure that you invite your stakeholders far enough in advance to ensure attendance, because if you wait until a week or two before, chances are you're not going to have all the people there that you need to be there. And then you develop your scenario. A common thing that that is in my conversations with trauma surgeons asking about, well, how do I do an exercise, is, well, what scenario should I choose as their first step? And that's really farther down the list of things to do. But when you do get to that point, you start with your hazard vulnerability analysis at your hospital. What are the things that you're really worried about in your community? And this will help your stakeholders be engaged and to think about how they're going to address the objectives. The more emotionally engaged they are, the more productive this will be. And it should be realistic and at least based on it, but not necessarily identical to real events. And then finally, developing the facilitation questions. You want to stay, I think anyone who's taken the ATLS instructor course will find this familiar. You want to stay focused on the objectives. You want to manage time appropriately so that you get to everything. You want to stay positive. You don't want to be accusatory or make this a negative experience. And you want to encourage everyone to participate. You want to use open and close-ended questions appropriately. So close-ended would be for things like facts or existing policies, and then open-ended for issues that require problem solving or creative thinking. And then finally, you summarize your solutions that are generated and you specify what's going to happen next after the exercise. So the after-action report improvement process, this is used quite extensively in the federal government and fire EMS. They use this for their exercises, and trauma surgeons should see this as the equivalent of our performance improvement process. It's virtually the same thing. And so when you do your report, you're going to describe the exercise, provide the overview, and then look at strengths and opportunities for improvement. Figure out corrective actions or solutions to what came up during the exercise, and then close the loop. That means follow-up. Testing whatever actions or solutions you decided on. And that's where your emergency manager can really help with the closing the loop and the ongoing process that exercises should be part of. So the key points for this manual. First, identify and engage with your emergency manager. This person has the time and the expertise needed to develop exercises relevant to mass casualty incidents. But they're not clinicians. They need your expertise to make this work. And so this is definitely a team effort. Second, start with your objectives. You want to then you can determine your stakeholders, your scenario, and your facilitation questions. And then finally, be cognizant that exercises are not one-time events. They're part of a program of exercises and other efforts that you're doing to develop your disaster plans, and then you're testing them. And there should be follow-up and performance improvement, just like we do with all other aspects of trauma surgery. So where are we in this? We're in the editing and refinement phase. I would like to get this out in the next few months, and once the manual is approved by the executive committee, we'll post it alongside E-DMEP and provide it as a resource so that those who perhaps aren't up to speed on this or need some guidance can use this as a resource. So thank you, and I will unshare my screen here and we'll start answering questions.
Thank you, Jeanette, and thank you, John, for really excellent descriptions and explanations of an exciting course. We will open up to questions. As Jeanette mentioned earlier, we could do this through the Q&A, which will probably be the best and easiest way to participate. We have the ability ultimately to open it up to voice, but it would be a little bit more challenging. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I believe Dr. Cools had a question. Do you mind if I read that and respond in case anybody hasn't had the opportunity to see? Dr. Cools asked how to translate the DMEP to the trauma team. Most trauma centers won't have the funds to purchase multiple subscriptions to E-DMEP. And Dr. Armstrong, you could maybe just verbalize your answer, and if Jeanette also, if you want to answer something to that effect.
Thanks, Deb, for your question, and thank you for being here with us. You are a global leader in surgery and in trauma. What I would think is that E-DMEP is a good start for surgeons and acute care professionals, and with that knowledge, there's an opportunity to share it on rounds and share it in TOPSY, and really show through action engagement in the disaster committee and in readiness, visibility and drills. They shouldn't be perfunctory. I think that E-DMEP with the 3 R's really feeds into that. There is work being done at this point to move forward with version 3 of in-person DMEP, which couples E-DMEP content and a tabletop exercise, which is incorporating concepts that Jeannette has discussed, and Jeannette has really taken the lead on that. So it will generate some synergy with bringing the teams together within hospitals. My view has been that DMEP has done well when it's delivered in hospitals with the teams who will use the material. That generates more action versus taking DMEP at a conference where you're with a variety of other people from a whole host of institutions. May not have as much stickiness. Jeannette, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do see, and I've heard this multiple times, the concern about cost. And probably there are people that are prohibited from taking E-DMEP because of that. And so that's why both versions are available. I think there probably will be more discussion about how we can adjust things to make it more accessible, because that was really the whole point of E-DMEP, was to make it more accessible. And if cost is a major issue, we may need to rethink that.
I have a couple of questions, maybe just to even generate some conversation. The first one, open to both of you, is a very exciting course, and clearly the audience is trauma surgeons, but do you think there's a role in utilizing this course for your hospital leadership who know nothing about hospital incident command, maybe portions of it, or the entire thing, to help bring them on board with understanding the way a hospital or the surgical side of things or disaster should run for people who are not aware?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think now this particular course is very much geared toward the clinician, but there are big chunks of it that are very would be very useful to hospital administrators and nurses and other specialists. So yes.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed, especially at the beginning of COVID, was that our hospital administrators really had no clue how to run a hospital incident command and many things like that. So maybe not the entire DMEP course, but picking and choosing certain areas that may be valuable and hitting them over the head with some of it.
Well, I think there's more of an issue there of not planning to have the right person in charge. And the person who's going to be in charge should already have training in incident command. It doesn't necessarily have to be the CEO, who probably doesn't have time to do that. It should be whatever administrator is going to actually be the incident commander and the operations chief, et cetera. And so that's where you have to make sure your planning is solid.
Dr. Armstrong?
I was going to say, I think DMEP works well as a group activity. I think the second edition now, when you deliver it with the people who will have to use it together across specialties, across disciplines and professions, it does work to enhance readiness. It gets the conversations going that otherwise have proven to be elusive. In terms of the target audience, I would look at everybody who's in the gray book, and that does include leadership, and it does include emergency managers, and includes our emergency department nurses and ICU nurses, all the liaisons. You get where I'm going with this. DMEP in general is meant to be very inclusive, and E-DMEP follows the same model.
Is there a time limit on how long you need to or in order to complete the E-DMEP course, or you could do it over a long period of time?
Do you want to
Define
answer
long
that?
period of time.
Several days.
Yeah,
Well,
you
yeah.
have easily several days, and in fact, I want to say the limit is you have to do it within 3 months. So the point there is that it's 4 hours, and you could probably budget the time to get it done. And there is value in having the sequence done in an appropriate interval to not only process and reflect, but to see how the pieces come together.
Now that being said, it is available to learners for a year. So they could go back and redo certain modules if they wanted to later on. As new scenarios come online, they can go through the new scenarios if they want to, or they could even go back through the earthquake scenario if we don't traumatize them too much.
With the shaking,
Jeannette raises
with
an
the shaking
important point.
screens and whatnot. Yes.
You have access to it for a longer interval.
Yeah, great. Deb Cools also asked the question about where they are in the verification requirements. I think that answered the question. Is section 4.36. That was it's not in the section 2 where a bunch of disaster stuff is. This is in a slightly separate section for this particular requirement. Are there any other questions from the audience? Ooh, maybe I see another one. Hang on.
I think we've got 3 in the
Yes, we
Q&A.
do. Yeah. All right. Brad Chernock asks, has there been any discussion about an abridged version for staff, ancillary support, et cetera, who will be involved in response, but not necessarily planning or leadership?
Jeannette?
I would say no, there hasn't been discussion on that. there's a lot of different courses that people can take for disaster response, and it just depends on, you know, what specialty you're in and what your role would be. Like I said, this is focused from a trauma standpoint, obviously, because we're the American College of Surgeons and we're trauma surgery. And but I do think if people participated, particularly in the in-person version of DMEP, that they can certainly learn quite a bit from participating in that course.
Okay. Excellent. And then the next one is from Rachel Russo. Thank you for this important work. Following on this with the discussion, how do you envision this course will fit in alongside other disaster courses offered by or endorsed by the college? I think this is a really great question, as there are some other courses and some coming online in the near future. And I think, Jeannette, I'm going to ask you to cover this answer.
Okay.
To start off with.
So yes, I would think of disaster education by the American College as more of a curriculum now rather than just separate courses. For instance, ATLS does have an introduction. Well, in the past, it's been an appendix that is part of the ATLS manual, and triage scenarios that are part of that course, and really meant to be an introduction. It's as the chair of that particular content committee, I can tell you that it'll be trimmed down a bit, and we'll be referring people to the other courses that are available. DMEP, obviously, and then there's also the ADMR course, which is coming online pretty soon. It's focuses more on the clinical aspects of disaster response rather than the hospital preparation aspect of it, and would probably be good for people that are going to be deploying with civilian teams or perhaps even with military teams to disasters. And there are a number of other courses with other organizations. Again, I haven't taken all of them, and I'm not necessarily an expert on all of them, but you know, it really depends on where you're coming from, and you know, what your specialty is and what your role is going to be.
And Adam, if I can just follow up with that, I think Jeannette has done a good job integrating what's happening in the 11th edition of ATLS as the beginning of this curriculum, together then with E-DMEP, DMEP, tabletop exercises, and then ADMR. So it really is a suite. What's exciting about what's happened with E-DMEP and with DMEP in general is that for the first time, there's a standard that requires the trauma surgeon to the disaster committee in a level 1 trauma center to have taken DMEP. So standards are how we improve care. It does matter that the VRC has emphasized the importance of disaster training through a course like DMEP.
Excellent. We're at 5:59, so we have to end the session, but I do want to address
Adam,
the third.
Adam, if I may, just before you conclude, and I understand, I have to do a shout out to Brandon Shawwell. Brandon was the instructional designer for E-DMEP, and I should have highlighted him right up front. But what came as E-DMEP was a wonderful synergy between a very talented instructional designer and committed individuals to make sure the content was appropriate and reflects well through instructional design. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out there was one other comment from Mahmoud Dia, looks like an Egyptian medical student. I wrote him back privately, so we'll take care of that afterwards. But I would like to end by saying thank you to our panelists and to all those who took an hour of your time after, I'm sure, a very busy day. and would like to remind you to submit any of your sign-in sheets to the AAST office by this Friday, February 9th. Please feel free to join us for our next grand rounds on March 20th, where the topic will be geriatric trauma. I would like to thank you all again and have a wonderful night.